Well, let's bring in Stephanie Hayden, commentator and lawyer, and sports columnist Alan Moore for more on this. Guys, great to have you both on today. Thanks so much for coming on the programme. Now, transgender sports policy is pretty varied across the United States. Only 10 states have no guidance. Alan, if I can perhaps start with you. I mean, do you think this vote in Kansas is a blow to fairness and equality in sport?
I think it's very hard to say, Daniel, because if we're looking at it overall, I think that the way it's been set up, it's been made to cause conflict between a lot of different groups. And I think it's been used to lessen the rights of anyone who is transgender and wants to compete in sports. I think we all understand that there is a difference between men and women, and I think then if the restraints and the restrictions and also the processes that a man transitioning to a woman will have to undergo to say meet testosterone levels and so on, it's very, very difficult. So I think that this is really, I don't know, it's made a real mess of it, and I think that Kansas is very divided as a result.
Yeah, certainly true. And this is Stephanie. I mean, supporters of transgender athletes in women's sports say this is there to protect people's rights, to bring about equality. But surely looking from the other side here, don't you think women, biologically born women at least, are having their rights impeded by this sort of legislation?
Well, I think the starting point should be that politics should be kept out of sport. It is not the business, in my opinion, of a state legislature to start passing legislation restricting access to sport for any group. In my view, the way this should be dealt with is that each individual sport, via its governing bodies, should make a decision on what is best for their sport. There's some sports, for example, where it can be argued that the so-called biological differences are not going to make a difference. There's other sports, and the ones that come to mind are rugby, soccer, and I suppose in the United States, for example, American football, where putting somebody who's a trans woman, a biological male, some would argue, into that scenario would not be the best practice in my view. But by leaving it to the sports bodies concerned, they can carry out that essential balancing exercise of natal women's rights versus the rights of transgender women, girls, to participate in sport appropriate for their gender.
Alan, do you think Stephanie has a point there? This should be decided by sports bodies on a case-by-case basis, with perhaps, the whole physiological transformation that gender change entails being carefully taken into account and decisions made based on those processes?
Yeah, there's a good, it is a fair and valid argument, and I think there is an awful sense in that as well. However, I think you brought up quite well when you first asked the question to Stephanie, is that, what about the rights of women? And it's something that, a number of times on Capital Sports, on our radio show, we've spoken with female athletes, interviewed them. Of course, one of our co-hosts is a female athlete as well. And, speaking with them, they have concerns, for example, in tennis, because there is a huge strength disparity between male and female. And they themselves feel that this argument is going on above their heads, but yet it's they who will actually have to suffer. In that sense, and suffer in a competitive sense when it comes to sport. When we look at fight sports, for example, as you know yourself, that I boxed up to international level, and I was brought in for specialist sparring with female professional world champions when I was based in Germany. And I was given away, say, could be 7 to 10 kilos against some of the fighters that I was in against. And these were fine world champions. But there was such a difference, and even I was told to go easy on them. So there is that danger as well, that someone who will take advantage of this and take advantage of the goodwill of a lot of the society will abuse the situation, and there are deadly consequences.
Stephanie, do you think Alan has a point in there? Because when we talk about female transgender athletes, obviously nobody's talking about transgenders in men's sports, possibly because there's no violation there of fair play principles, equality principles. What do you think the issue is really about? Is it about human rights fundamentally, or is it about providing equal opportunities and a level playing field to all, where everybody can feel safe and included?
Oh, what this is about, in my view, is using the argument about access to sport for transgender women and girls as a dog whistle for transphobia. Let's be real here. There's not a queue of what people would call biological men, I would say trans women, queuing up to join female sports as a way of securing medals that they otherwise would not secure if they were competing against biological men in elite sports. I mean, how many gold medalists at the Olympics have been trans women? I can probably count them on one hand, if at all. This is just a scare story which is brought out once again to propagate the view that trans women are anything other than women. You know, women's sports are women's sports, and I'm not saying that it's appropriate in every sport that somebody who was formerly male should be allowed to compete. In some sports, that would be ridiculous. That's just my view. However, the starting point must be that if the governing body of the sport concerned, having conducted a balancing exercise and assessed the risks, takes the view that trans women, trans girls can compete safely and fairly, then that is a matter for them. That is a judgment call they make every day. It's not for some, you know, reactionary state legislature to start second-guessing the decisions of a sport governing body.
Alan, if, as Stephanie said, in some sports it might not be fair to allow transgender athletes to compete in women's sports, how do you think we can ensure that transgender athletes get the opportunity to participate in competitions and are respected, everybody's emotional well-being is taken into account, and a level playing field is provided within reason?
Stephanie immediately herself put in a case where there will be discrimination, and that there should be discrimination, that, like, you know, all sports are equal, but some are less equal than others. You know, it's either, you know, we look at some sports, for example, in show jumping, horse racing. The champion jockey this year, Rachel Hardiman, I've just blanked her family name, from Ireland, you know, was able to compete and beat the best male riders. Same in show jumping, eventing, and so on and so forth. But, you know, it's if we go down this line and say, okay, like, if we look at the rules that have been brought in the States, that it's not a transitioning male who can compete, and that high schools and universities have to allow people who, I would say, I don't know the correct word, but to present themselves, or to who feel themselves female, that they should be given the same rights and be allowed to compete in female sports. It's so ambiguous right now in the law, and I think that that's why in the legislature in the States, went into the Senate and the floor, and then the governor overruled it in the end. It's so messy and so dangerous. But I don't think there's not transphobia in this, and I think that once we bring in transphobia, that is a dog whistle. That is saying that my argument, saying that I don't want to see a man who's transitioned into female to go in and fight my daughter in the ring. That's not transphobia. That's just common sense. But again, you know, if boxing says we're not going to allow trans males or trans females to box, you know, again, there has to be a third way. And I think one of the proposals was that there would be a separate category, to be male, female, and, you know, a mixed category. We have to come up with solutions like that and look at it from a sporting point of view. Unfortunately, a lot of people who have no background, no interest in sport, want to get involved in it because it suits their agenda, and that just is not going to work. And again, people have to ask the female athletes, people have to ask the sports administrators what is best for their people, and there has to be a way to bring it together.
Alan and Stephanie, we are running out of time. I could, got a lot of questions lined up, but we are limited. If I could just get your final thoughts, both of you, 30 seconds. Stephanie, just starting with you.
I don't think Alan and me are that far apart. I think the main difference is that I am firmly of the view that these are decisions on a case-by-case basis for each governing body of each sport concerned. When politicians get involved in sport, it becomes a dog's breakfast and a disaster, whether that is boycotts of the Olympics or comments about trans women. Leave it to the sports bodies concerned.
And Alan, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Stephanie has nailed it on the head. I think we need to be very, very careful with this, because we need to look out, first of all, for athletes' health and well-being, no matter what gender they are. If they're transitioned, if they're born male, born female, it doesn't make a difference. We need to look out for them. And as she said, that politicians like to play games. You see the amount of nonsense that's gone on towards Russia in the last few years, and this is just another way to mess up sports. But there has to be a solution. There has to be a third way. We have to make it better for the athletes.
Yeah, some great closing points, guys, in agreement. Common sense, keeping politics out of sport, and seeing the opposite view will solve all the problems. Stephanie Hayden, commentator, and lawyer Alan Moore, sports columnist, thanks both so much for your time here today on RT.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for now. The team and I return in half an hour.